There we go. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back for those who have also been away for a month, just like Craig and myself. And if you're brand new here today, as Craig said, welcome. Please do use the chat and definitely the Q&A. We'll try and get through as many as we can. As I just mentioned, this actually is campus this week. I think it was Tuesday, but I might be lying, could be Wednesday. Been able to hang out there with some very fabulous people for a few days now. So what you're seeing on your screen is Heritage Hall, as we call it. It's one of our main buildings on SAIT's campus. We are located in the area that the Blackfoot tribes traditionally called Mokintis, which is where the Bow River meets the Elbow River. We're on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of the Treaty 7, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Iyahi Nakoda of Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Goodstoney. And we are also home, to the Métis Nation of Alberta. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Jenny. And folks, I just threw into the chat. Please do take a moment to follow Say Corporate Training on LinkedIn, and we're happy to connect with you as well. So please feel free to connect with me and Jenny there. And you'll see a link for the next session on April 17th. That's a Thursday. A little bit out of the normal the next time around because the 18th is Good Friday and we won't be working. So but speaking of working, Jenny, we're here today to talk about virtual leadership. No, not virtual leading, leading hybrid and virtual teams. And it's interesting how we got here. If you think back, geez, it's almost 5 years ago, exactly,
Very
uh,
much. Yep.
right? Where we all got sent home. We all got forced. Well, I shouldn't say all. Those of us who were in those situations that were told to go home and work from home were done so. And we had to figure out by necessity back then how to lead teams remotely. For some folks who'd never been in that situation before, it was a huge adjustment. Um, then we got a couple years in and we started, calling people back, or in some cases, forcing people back to the office, which, might have resulted in some quiet quitting here and there, not to trigger everybody with all the COVID flashbacks. But now it's more of a strategic question, right? Remote and hybrid work, I think for the most part, is somewhat here to stay. It's always been around, but it's somewhat here to stay now. And it's more of a question of how do we leverage this flexibility and capture the pros and figure out how to manage the cons as leaders of remote working. So let's use that as our trailhead. We'll start there. I don't know what that triggers for you, what thoughts, but let's go from there.
It was a pretty good way to to capture us. There's a number of things. I think the biggest thing that you just leaned on and that we often don't contemplate is that when we think about completely remote, or actually no, completely remote, if you're going to let's go to the extreme to start with.
Yep.
What we have to do is override. It's not just even tens of years, like this is hundreds of years of the way that we have worked, the structures that we've put in place, what we've learned, and that's a whole load of unlearning. Like we are hardwired to face-to-face structures. So this was a big flip. And it was happening before the pandemic, but just like a whole load of things that the pandemic left us with, we press fast forward. And when you think about it too, 5 years ago, Zoom was not like Zoom is today. And Teams was nowhere like near like Teams is today. So there's a whole ton of fast forward and press this going on. And I think the other thing that's big, and in fact, I used it as our big idea today, there is a big difference between working from home and being an effective remote team
Mm.
member or teammate. There's even a big difference between team member and teammate. Like, how are we showing up? What are we doing? So leaders were forced into it, maybe have been forced into it. Some were choosing it beforehand. During the pandemic, some chose, some companies said, this is great. Let's go here permanently. And
Yeah.
so there's a whole load of different versions going on within there. Um, The quiet quitting is always an interesting one, but if you stop and chat with me on quiet quitting, I'm going to go very quickly what was going on within the leadership to cause that to happen. So I think your piece too there, this leadership piece is huge. And for those of you who might be brand new here, we always talk about leadership as a behavior. It's for anybody, not just the leader who has the title, but the leader who has the title has a much different process, maybe it's called, mindset, actually. Let's go with mindset in order to lead virtually.
Yeah, and it's an adjustment. I recall, so 17 years before I came to Sate, I was a remote employee. I was sales
Mm-hmm.
rep, and my office was my windshield, right? And I used to pull over to the side of the road and find a payphone. Folks, yes, this is not gray hair dyed in; it's natural gray. But I'd find a payphone to check my voicemail 3 or 4 times a day. And that's how we stayed in contact. This was
Mm-hmm.
even pre-laptop. And so you started thinking back to how did teams run effectively back then in that scenario? And now we have all these ways of communicating, connecting with your team. And as a leader, you need to think about, how am I going to do this effectively? What
Mm-hmm.
ways do I want to? There's a level. I think this is perhaps my first question for you is, there's a level of intentionality,
Oh yeah.
perhaps even more so, that needs to be magnified when you're leading a remote team or a hybrid team. And
Mm-hmm.
like, what does that lead for you? Like, when we think about all these things that we do in person, like if your
Mm-hmm.
team's coming into an office every day and you get to see them every day, leadership can to some extent happen by accident, or just
Yeah.
serendipitously as you're bouncing off each other in the office. But if you got a team that's working remotely all the time, how do you as a leader make sure, like, what do you have to do differently to make sure that you're being intentional about it?
Everything. Like seriously, I think intention is that's got to be the big word. Like we were saying, today's webinar is brought to you by the word intention. You have to be intentional about everything because, as we said already, all of that hardwired stuff is in there, and now we've shifted it all. So when you work face to face, this isn't necessarily the right way to do it, but culture is created by chance in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And even if you're working face to face, different conversation. In fact, we've had it a couple of times. You have to be intentional about your culture if you're face to face. But if you're working remotely, you've actually intentionally got to design that culture to work with the people who are on your teams. So we're actually looking at a team culture there. And the biggest piece in there, this doesn't sit on a leader's shoulder. This is everybody. Involve your people in the designing of that culture. And it comes down to questions as simply, how will we ask for help? Like, how will we have fun? How will we? And that's work. And that's time. And this is where the pandemic didn't necessarily help us because a lot of people went into crisis mode. We saw many, many people working more hours than they'd ever worked before. And no time was made for that because we all thought, oh, we'll be back to normal, we'll be back to this. So the shift wasn't really made. And I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder the teams that have stayed virtual or still got that hybrid piece, have you actually stopped and said, what do we love? What do we not like at all and we want to get rid of? And what could we do differently? Even that would be a starting place. So that intentionality is huge. And it's not just your culture. You want to build trust with your people. Trust is your foundation to everything. If you're working remotely, you have to intentionally build that trust. You have
Yeah.
to intentionally build those relationships. Everything is filled with intention rather than chance.
Yeah. And it's, even to your point, like, what do we love about it? What do we want to let go? What do we
Mm.
want to change? I'm not sure we've had that conversation in our own team, kind of since we've hit this 5 year mark. And so that's something to think about. But it, I wonder if leaders struggle with this sometimes. And I'm making an assumption that some out there are struggling with this, because it does perhaps seem too basic to say, how are we going to communicate when we just got, ubiquitous communication channels all over the place, versus sitting down and having a conversation with your team to say, here's our rules of engagement or our rules of communicate. It just seems so basic, but I don't know. It's just one of those thoughts that
Yeah. It is when we say it in that language, but the part that you just said that, okay, here's our rules of engagement, even if we use that terminology, one of the things that we're going to need to be intentional about is building the psychological safety. And in order to build it, you've got to set the stage, rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Okay, what will we do? What will we not do? How will this work? That is good conversation. And if it's happening when we don't need it, the wonderful phrase is strike while the iron is cold. We're setting things up that we can lean on and pull back on that we've all agreed on, right? There's the intentionality. We've all agreed on that. So putting that into place, you're already starting to build that psychological safety piece. And so yes, it's basic, but it's absolutely crucial. I think that's the way to take a
Yeah,
look at that. And that's time well spent. That's a time investment.
absolutely. And so we've triggered a couple questions related to that. One is, and I'm gonna put the word remotely at the end of this because I think the question is how to build psychological safety remotely,
Mm.
right? Or it could be in general. I think it's probably the same steps, but
I don't think the theory never changes. I mean, yeah, it does. We just repackage it. But the piece the piece within here, in case anybody's brand new to psychological safety, the last thing you're going to do is talk to your team and say, okay, let's talk about psychological safety. They'll run and rightfully, or they'll turn the cameras off and be busy with email or whatever that might be. And so what psychological safety really is about is what are the small consistent behaviors that will allow us to behave into the environment that we want. The sort of three main pillars, if you like, is setting the stage. What is okay? What is not okay? Rules of engagement, as you called them. How do we create space for voice? That's the second one. Psychological safety is about the environment that allows people to take interpersonal risks, and then productive responses. And that's an interesting one when we're working virtually because sometimes your cameras are on, sometimes your cameras are off. Like, how do we do that? How do we engage in that piece? So those are your three sort of constructs. But the piece to be careful of, and what has happened a lot, is you've got trust as your foundation. We've got this psychological safety idea, and true psychological safety, those environments are gritty. Like people, there's friction. It's intellectual friction, not social friction, but there's friction, and we need that. Like you and I
no,
have to disagree for us to
no, we
get
don't.
better, move on. But what's happened in a lot of cases, and oh, what is his name? Gustavo Rosati talks about this a lot. There's a bubble over the top, and that bubble is niceness. And we run around
Mhm.
protecting everybody. That's not psychological safety. That's a completely different piece.
Yeah, the niceness pieces. I just had a conversation with somebody about that this week, and um, a collaborative team coming together to try and
Mm,
get some things done. And I just said, it's not about necessarily being nice all the time. Like
no.
sometimes great teams come together through the challenges, the
Yep.
disagreements, the willingness of somebody to step up and say, "Hey, I don't think this is going the right direction."
Yeah.
Right?
And for the leaders that are in the room, people won't do that. They won't challenge if they don't feel that safety in the relationship. So rather than being offended, that's actually the biggest compliment in the world. Like if somebody feels safe enough to challenge you as a leader, give yourself a pat on the back and deal with the conversation. We refer to it nowadays as productive conflict. We need conflict, but how do we make it productive?
Yeah, I always think of it as debate, right?
Yeah,
It's a,
if you
it's
like.
a debate. It's not an argument. Call it what you want. So three questions here kind of tie together.
Great.
You've touched on this a little bit. How do you facilitate a remote roundtable discussion to ensure psychological safety when it's a sensitive topic? I think you've kind of said, well, we don't necessarily jump in to have a conversation about psychological safety. Rather, it's everything else that goes with it. Um, how do you build trust with a new team when it's virtual? And can you work remotely without trust? I think the answer
Ooh,
to that one is no, but it's kind of tied to that piece of with if you've never been through working remotely before or leading a team working remotely before, how do you know they're working, right? So
yeah.
they all kind of tie together. So
We're going to
Dealer's
start at the end.
choice as to how you approach it. Yes.
Okay, let's start at the end. Can you work remotely without trust? Probably not, unless you're doing completely independent work that has
Sure.
nothing to do with anybody else. And to your point, and this is one of the sort of the mind shift changes that we have to make between fully synchronous face to face and fully remote, is we've got to leave that idea of input behind. And it makes my skin crawl a little bit when I hear about companies that are tracking mouse movements and all the rest. So you're doing that for me. I spend a ton of time reading. That mouse isn't moving, and that's actually deep work. And I don't need anybody else in that.
Yeah.
So we're moving from input to impact, which means we've got to think a lot about what is the value, what is the contribution, what is the outcome that we're looking for. So I think the answer to the last one is quite simply not really. The middle one, how do you build trust remotely? So when we build trust, there's a wonderful conversation in our backlog for anybody who wants to go looking with Ela Edgar, who's a total expert on trust. And the four domains that we can build trust in are competency, reliability, sincerity, and care. And you can absolutely build a relationship online. So there's all four of those that you can work with, extend. The beauty of building trust is I have control as to how I work in those four with, say, you in particular. So am I extending care? Am I showing that I'm competent in the right places where you need me to be competent? And by the way, part of competence is being able to say, I don't have that skill set. Craig, you can ask me to do an Excel spreadsheet with all the calculations in it, and I will simply say to you, no, I don't have that skill set. I really don't. And so building trust, it's not up to the other person to build the trust. It lies with us and it's reciprocal. It's a very two-way street. And then the first one, those of you watching the screen may have caught me smile. I am not a fan of roundtable meetings whatsoever. And put a round table online with cameras off. I'm not sure that you're getting value. Like when you think about it, and this is one of the kind of shifts that we're making, is for what reason are we bringing people together? So if your roundtable is simply people giving information and you are working remotely, there's a way better way for them to give that information before the meeting and then have the people that you've invited who are crucial to the conversation show up with a purpose. And maybe that purpose is discussion, maybe that purpose is questions, maybe it's decisions, whatever the purpose is. The meeting, when you bring people together, whether it's online or not, or face to face, it's going to cause something to happen. And it's about the discussion and the connection between people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I would suggest for your roundtable, just pause, take a look at it, and say, am I actually getting what I need and what the team really needs from this structure?
Yeah. And I think, I'll kind of play on that last question a little bit around the
Mm,
roundtable. I'm going to lean more into how do you have the conversation with your team around psychological safety and trust? To your point, you want you want to encourage, good exchange, good debate of ideas.
mhm.
And as a leader, you're seeing that's not happening in our
Okay.
meetings, right?
Yep.
Let's just go that way. I'm gonna make an assumption about the question that maybe that's not happening, and
Okay.
you're speaking to a quiet room and the
So
team's not engaging. So how do you clearly in that case, either everybody just thinks, you as the leader are way off base and don't know what the heck you're talking about, or there's something else going on in that. So how do you start to bring that back?
I think the key, we always say for leaders, your culture is defined by what you reward and what you tolerate.
Yep.
So again, it's not about sort of labeling the psychological safety, but what it is about is I'm talking, I don't often speak, and you talk across me or you interrupt me. Leader, chair of that meeting, do you allow that to happen? If you do, then you've just said to everybody in the room, cutting over other people and not letting them finish their thought or what they're saying is an acceptable practice. I ask a question and I'm junior to the team, Craig, you're senior to the team. And even on camera, what we catch is, right now we forget because we're in our own little box here,
Yep.
and we literally we forget that everybody can see your body language, apart from possibly the person who's speaking, because they're too busy looking at the camera maybe rather than the screen.
Yep.
And so, if you want to build that environment where people will take those risks, where people will speak up and enter into the conversation, then watch for what you're tolerating, watch for what you're rewarding both ways, and think about what is the environment that I want. And another place where we've been before, and we don't need to go down the pathway, but even as simple as I need to give you some feedback. Okay, what does that look like when we're online? Have we actually talked about what feedback is? What's the aim of it? What are we doing with it? And we've brought ourselves all the way back to that intentional piece again. We have to define what that looks like. By defining what it looks like, what are the behaviors, observable probably, that we can practice that allows us to be there? And then when we do practice that, reward that. So if a chair
Yeah.
says, Craig, I know you're passionate about this. I'm going to let Jenny finish her thought first, and then we'll come to you. Right, well, if you're the Jenny in that case, thank that chair later. Okay, I noticed that you made space for me to talk. Thank you for doing that. That's a productive response.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on something key there too, because it's not all on the leader
No.
to make this
Right.
happen. And I think sometimes maybe perhaps leaders get hung up or feel that they have to be the ones that have all the answers here
Mm.
versus involving and recruiting the team to be part of the answers as well. Couple more questions have come in here. This one I'm glad it didn't come from somebody on my team. But what do you do when the leader is the one interrupting and cutting across what people are saying?
I don't think we would say that about you. Um, we said this at the beginning. Okay, leadership is a behavior, so therefore it doesn't have to be the leader that steps in. And in that case, it might sound like, I'm actually really curious. What did Jenny have to say? Can we go back and make sure that we've heard everybody in this conversation? Um, and we've talked about this. It will depend on the relationship between you and your leader. If you're noticing it a lot, it's possible they don't even know. And when they
Mm,
when they come with, think about the demands on the leader. They come with they've got to achieve this. The performance has got to be up. The pressure is on. We forget that we're busy doing our work, and they're under accountability too. And they think that they know the answer. They sometimes forget that we're all adults with a skill set that can contribute. And it's often a sort of a passion in the urgency. They want to speed up the conversation because they believe they know the way there. So
yeah,
maybe it's what we would call a call in. It's a quick conversation afterwards. And that is going to depend on the relationship between you and your leader. So if it was us, let's say that happened, I might say, Craig, have you got a moment after the meeting? And I'm not sure if you're aware, I have noticed, XYZ, whatever that might be. If it's
yeah,
an absolute strange behavior, it might start with, "You're doing okay?" You notice there was a speed and an urgency in your
yeah,
meeting. And that requires us to pay attention, know your people,
yeah.
right?
No, absolutely. Um, how do you work to engage your team in virtual meetings? I feel like most meetings I do currently with my team, I talk, I ask questions, I try to engage, and I get blank stares and radio silence. I'm newer to leadership, so it's hard not to feel awkward every time that happens.
Yes, that and the silence on, especially on a screen, is a long time. It takes most people 8 seconds to, if they've thought about it, to answer a question. And when you're working remotely, that can feel like forever. I think the biggest piece in here is how are you structuring your meetings? It's possible, I don't know, that you're carrying all the weight. So if you have a team,
Mm.
it's very healthy to involve the team in the agenda, in who leads the meeting. If it's a list of things that could be information, that probably can be somewhere else, and then build the conversation for just that, for the conversation. One of the other ways, if you really want to sort of throw the cards in the air and let them land, is have the meeting. And if you're working virtually, you can have a remote whiteboard or, well, even in Zoom, you can do what I think in Teams, you can do the whiteboard too now. And ask them, what do we need to talk about today?
Mm,
And if there's absolutely nothing, okay, then there's nothing. But that is a flag to you in terms of normally if there's nothing, like if there's complete radio silence, there may be hiding behind there a reason that people aren't speaking up. So what is holding them back? That may be sort of emerge in a one-on-one conversation, perhaps. It's
yeah,
usually an indication that there might be some psychological safety work to do in there. But I think where I would go to is the structure of your meeting.
yeah, yeah. And I was going to say, and to your point, the one-on-ones trying to dig in
Mm.
behind the scenes, so to speak, and find out what might be driving it. You may have, every team generally has one or two people that the leader can really somewhat confide in and say, "Hey, what's going on?"
Yeah.
Right? Tell me what's happening here. So, um, okay, a few other questions here. This is an interesting one. How do you effectively lead when the company decides to end remote and hybrid work options, requiring everyone to return to the office while also refusing to cover additional employee expenses such as transportation, transit, and parking, especially when you personally don't agree with the decision?
This is hard.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, it this is a hard one. Like I don't know that I have a huge answer to this. If a couple of things that kind of spring to mind, cover the extra costs. Were they covered before? Like if you're returning to what you had before, were they covered before? I'm not sure that that's an interesting take on that one. So, where are the boundaries on there? The you need to come back to work. I think I would try and find what is behind the decision for that. And then I think what we need is a real understanding of the kind of work that we do. So the switch to remote work and the research that's available talks a lot about understanding the work that you're in. So deep work which requires focus, right? No other distractions, you're unavailable. Shallow work, you're completely available. Your little team's thing is green and available, like literally you're available. That's the shallow work, that's the easy stuff. Doesn't matter if you're interrupted. And then there's the stuff we do together, people, we, and the things that I can do all by myself, me. And so, in setting your team up, how can you help them to take on those different kinds of work? How can you reconnect to the purpose? How can you make that face to face available? We are seeing, I don't have research or sort of strong data on this, where companies are pulling the force. Hopefully, they don't have a value of flexibility because that would be a little ironic if they did. Um, People have to make choices. Like if it really isn't the choice you want anymore, then that's a choice that you have to make. I don't know how you can force, especially in the bigger organizations, how you can force that. I think there's an example of Amazon where the staff all got together and wrote back to the C-suite. I feel like it's
Hmm.
Amazon. I might be wrong there.
Something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a difficult one to answer. I think if your team is upset by that, provide the empathy. Pull them
Yeah.
all in, let them talk about what it is that they're struggling with. People want to be seen, heard, and valued, and give them that. It doesn't mean they have to fix everything. It doesn't mean that you can change anything, and that can be a boundary that you set before you have the conversation. But most people, when they you hear them, right, this is difficult. My child does this, and I do that, and we set up this rhythm. Provide the empathy, but don't forget the performance, right? This isn't like this. They're absolutely in balance.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I think the other thing too that I would consider is, um, as a leader, if you're now speaking up, is the policy is it open to discussion? Is
Yeah,
it, or is, right?
100%.
If this is set in stone, that's a very different
Hmm.
reality from, oh, well, no, we're going to put tariffs in today, but maybe tomorrow. Hey, it took us half an hour to get the tariffs.
Yeah,
That's
like, come on.
But, if it truly is, this is the way it is, then you have a choice, right? You can
Yeah.
figure out how to lead your team as best you can in that moment, be empathetic, do all of that. And then as a leader, you're going to have a choice as to, is this the organization I want to be with as well? It sucks. I'm not saying that's a great spot to be in. It is not. It's not an easy one at all. In some ways, yes, you can say it is black and white and it is very easy because this is a decision. This is the way we're going. We didn't pay for your transit before. Why would we pay for it now? Some of those things I can say, yeah, thanks for asking, but no, I get why we're not paying for it. Uh,
Mm,
but in some cases too, and it ties into another question here, is that um, um, essentially remote leadership will not go away even if we force everyone back. So how do
yeah.
you, right? How do you blend that into the reality? And it also kind of speaks to a conversation we'll have in a few weeks around managing up. What
Mm.
is your role as a leader to communicating that back up to senior management? Sorry, I'll get off my welcome. Thanks for attending my TED talk there.
It, yeah, it's hard, and I think the key there too, that was interesting. Is it a hard, fast policy? And if you're the leader and you know how your team works and you know what they need, you can work with that policy. And then to your point,
Yeah.
that conversation upwards and and where is the wiggle room? Is there no wiggle room? If there isn't, what have we got to work with? How does this look? And then I think too, there's a lot of, okay, let's just get back to how it was pre-pandemic. We didn't like it pre-pandemic, right? There weren't loads of people who said, I love my job and I love going to work. Like they really didn't. So actually the opportunity here is what will you do differently? Okay,
Yeah.
we worked differently during the pandemic. Okay, now we're in this situation. If you can sit in that sort of that acceptance, pull the curiosity and back to what we said before. What did we like before? What do we need to get rid of? And what could we make better? And so if we're on a project and we need that deep, uninterrupted time, as a leader, can you give your people 1 day a week where they don't attend meetings? There's no other requirement, but they're working on whatever that is. And then
Yeah.
you can protect them from that. That is already a different way of working. If you're holding meetings face to face, now you have to because you're working face to face. How will you structure them differently? And we seem to just be stumbling back into, we do it all the time. We're stumbling back into comfort because we're creatures of comfort. And even though we didn't like it, it works.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's an interesting one. Um, Tons more questions. Sorry, I'm just distracted by the number of questions that we have here and trying to see if I can figure out how we effectively pull them all together. So I think a couple more around virtual meetings.
Mm-hmm.
One is dealing with sorry, folks. Um, I'm a manager of a technical team located in two different cities. I've worked on the foundation of trust, psychological safety, and have measured progress on these areas by observing participation, freedom of opinions, and also how many turn their cameras on during meetings. How can I best encourage them to turn their cameras on during meetings as opposed to mandate it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there was a time, I'm pretty sure if you go back through our webinars, I'd be like, put your camera on. This is really important. And then we become strikingly aware of actually it's not about cameras on all the time. So I think, whoever that question came from is, when do you need them on? What is the ask? We need to have a huge awareness here. Some of our neurodivergent members of our
Mm.
communities, cameras on is really tricky for them because
Yep.
now they're spending the whole time trying to make sure that the signals that they're giving are matching what they're trying to say. That's energy going in the wrong place. So know your people. Absolutely know your people. We do know that cameras on helps to build relationship and helps to build connection. But we also know that sometimes cameras off and just the audible is really good for that deep collaboration work where we've got two or three people really connecting to work on a project or a specific issue or something. So I think that the conversation is, what do we need and when do we need it? And it's a team conversation. And then as a leader, you got to pull the good pieces out of there and decide, okay, this is a point where we have cameras on. This is going to be a cameras off meeting, and here's why. Or we're going to have cameras on for the first 5, 10 minutes whilst we connect. Then we'll turn them off to work, and then we'll come back on at the end. I have heard other teams that say cameras on whilst you're talking. There's another sort of method that I've heard where it's about the numbers in the room. So if you've got more than 6 people in your meeting, that's a cameras off meeting. The problem is if we're not being an effective remote team member and engaging, then
Right.
we're doing 5 other things at the same time and listening. And that's not always a contribution.
Yeah.
So uh, we're back to what's the structure of the meeting, who's in the meeting, and involving your team. If it's your team piece, what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I think the key thing for me there is, are you getting engagement and
Mm.
involvement, whether you have camera on or camera off? If you're sitting in a meeting room, you're not looking at everybody all at the same time while you're talking. And literally, if your head was constantly turning around the room as you're talking to everybody sitting around the table, your team would think you're nuts. But are you engaging and participating? It's easy to be on camera and have my email screen set up such that my camera line is right above, and it looks like I'm paying attention, but I'm taking care of my emails too,
Yep.
right? So, um, part of this too is, as we've kind of come through, people have been hired into new positions and they're meeting teams virtually that they've never led before. So, how do you ensure inclusivity if you're leading a group discussion and you've never met them before? So, yeah.
Yeah, inclusion is huge. And again, more intentional when you're working remotely. Um, it's building the social capital. So if you've never met them before, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're going to go meet them. And how are you going to do that? Depends which channel you're using, how you set that up. Remember, not every meeting has to be an hour. You can have a 15-minute meet and greet. You can be less than that if you like. And that connect before content, we talk about that a lot, that builds social capital is so, so important. And it's ongoing. So you're leading, I think the question said leading a new team. Was that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of infer, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So get to know the people, make sure that they know each other. And there's numerous ways that you can do that. Be really careful. If you Google icebreakers, you're going to get thousands and thousands of ideas. Read them carefully before you pick them up and put them in there. Some of them are awful. And know your people. Some of them will land well and some of them won't. And not all icebreakers are fluffy and fun. You can have some really good
Hmm.
conversation where you're getting to know how people approach things, think about things. And then so that build that connection, keep building that connection. Don't forget to do the work, of course. There's a little bit at the beginning of the meeting and then and you just keep going, just keep working
Yeah.
with it.
I think the other thing too to make sure you can do is acknowledge up front.
100%.
Hey, I'm leading this conversation for the whole bunch of you that I've never met before,
Mm,
right? Sometimes Occam's razor, isn't it? Right? The
yeah,
simplest.
yeah.
Um, I'm relatively new to my company and I'm lead over a number of employees that were here before me. I feel like I've been thrown to the wolves in some regards, and my manager expects me to figure it out. What are some tips or tools I can use to lead well?
Staying with the remote, I'm assuming that this is remote.
I'm sure there's also some face to face as well.
Okay. Um, well, if you're starting, get to know your people. 100% know your people. Um, Make sure that your people know you as well. That's an important part in it.
Yep.
And then I think I would still sit with that sort of culture by design. I think that's a good place to hang out. You might want to watch for a while and get used to the job fit and the roles that people are holding. And as you get to know people, when you're working within that, you'd be finding out what their strengths are, what they love doing, often different than their strengths, what they don't like. That's on an individual level. And then with the culture, what's working, what's not working, what could be better. Those are just starting places. And then as you lean into that leadership and build that social capital and that trust bank, that's when you can start to look at the conditions that are being set up for performance.
Yeah. I think the piece I would add to that one as well is, the comment around my manager expects me to figure it out. Yes. And yes, they do expect you to figure it out because they put you in a position to lead a team. But it's okay, I think, to also lean on that, lean on your manager to say, you know, what do you see as key here? Where do you think I should be focusing? Or like, what are some of the piece? Like, try and get some directionality if you can. If it's just
Hmm. Hmm.
here you go, here they are, good luck. That's a
Just,
little different. Like, I would
yeah.
hope you would have some of that air cover to give you some directionality.
Yeah, and maybe the figure it out is I trust you and I'm giving you the autonomy. It's just not landed in
100%.
the right way and they don't realize that you'd like some help. It's okay to ask for help.
Yeah.
If you're that leader that's been asked for help too, I'd run the flag. We're really quick to give advice and make sure that you're listening first. What is it that they truly need some help on, not just what you think would be good and fun.
Yeah. We're running really tight on time.
Oh yeah.
And I want to, and I'm sorry, folks, we're not going to get to all the questions, but we will figure out how to get you some answers to these. And so I think there's one I'm going to come to because for me, it perhaps sums up the debate on this whole return to office piece.
Mm.
And the drive towards it is fueled by the desire to bring back more spontaneity and innovation that being in person, face to face, is believed to create. The question is, what's our sense of this perspective? I'm going to tie into this. Um, Remote work prove people can be productive at home. So is productivity the only measure, right? Yeah. So
So I have this in one of the questions. There are only three questions this week too.
wow.
It's not just about productivity. So especially when we're remote, the terms that normally come up are productive, proactive, potential, and people. And so that proactive piece is really key for individual contributors, for leaders, for higher up the hierarchy as well. And and it's about sort of joining dots, scanning what you're hearing. So proactive might sound like, remotely, it might be a quick Teams message, just you and me. Craig, I heard this today, or I noticed this today. That's curious. Is that tied to anything that we're thinking of towards that we're moving towards? Now it might be the first that you've heard about it, be like, oh, all right, that's interesting. And then next thing we know, we've got four of us that are making some time to take a look at that, have a conversation around that. What it looks like in face to face is me sticking my head around the office door. Hey, did you know? All right, did you hear this? We're
Yeah,
just doing that remotely as well. But it's interesting, you have to be proactive, which for a lot of people is a courage step because if we take titles here, I'm skip level, what, 1, 2, 3 to get to you by title if we take true state title.
mm,
And for a lot of people, that's it. Why would I drop the director a note to say I noticed this? When you're working remotely, that's what proactive is about. And it's not just up and down, it's sideways. It's simply being intentional about making those sort of outer circle connections.
absolutely. But with that, Jenny, we do. It is 8:45.
Let's get there.
So we have to give this wonderful audience uh, out the door so they can all get to their 9 o'clock remote meetings.
Hopefully, it's not a round table. Okay, for those of you who are brand new here, we always finish, and I'm on the wrong slide here. This one will come to you. If you join us, we send you all the slides. There's your 5 remote mindsets that I was talking about. We always finish with one big idea. Ooh, go there, Jenny. One big idea, 2 strategies that you can hopefully use. There's a few more than 2 in here today, and 3 questions. 1, 2, 3. So a big idea, as I already mentioned today, is I mean, this is worth bearing in mind. This is not about working from home anymore. This is about being an effective member of a remote team, whether you're a leader, individual contributor, whatever it might look like. So it's changing the mindset there as well already. This was a slide that we had last time we got together, Craig, a year ago, but I kept it in here
Mhm.
a year ago, a month ago, because this checking in is intentional. And I'm going to say remotely, it might happen more than weekly. And the key for leaders, especially those of you who are a little bit on that perfectionist side, frequency over brilliance. It doesn't have to be a brilliant connection every time, but that constantly being visible and being seen, which takes us to our first
I'm gonna,
strategy.
sorry, Jen, I'm gonna interrupt on that one. I know I generally don't here, but there was one question around
Oh,
intentionality, and I
yep,
would say, schedule those check-ins as a leader.
absolutely.
That's a practice that you can put it in your calendar that I'm gonna check in with Joe, Jenny, Craig today, right?
Yeah,
So anyway,
100% brilliant. And with that visibility that we can see on the screen now, we've had this one before too. One of the techniques that you can use, put in your calendar what's called pit time, purposefully interruptible time. And so if we have that, then that gives you a block in your calendar. If I know that you have pit time, okay, this is a time when I can call you up and I can, connect within there. So we can work that both ways. So it's about being remotely visible. And for leaders, it's about where are you? How present are you? How are you showing up as well? The second one, I mentioned this just briefly before we got to these applied strategies, is understanding this shrinking circle idea. So we're really, really good at communicating with the people in our near contact, but those outer circles can get diminished, especially when we're working remotely. So it might be about building a habit towards reaching out to those outer circles, and that might be a bit of that proactive piece that we were talking about too. Leaders who are here really worth helping your junior members with this because that could be hard. Maybe you can help make those connections. It's a great way to bust silos as well within organizations. And then we've talked a lot about virtual meetings. So, a couple of things that can help towards these remote meetings. The first one goes for face to face as well. Always connect before content. Fika is the Swedish term for it. This one needs to happen wherever you are, whenever you're in a meeting. It helps people with the transition, it helps build social capital. As I said, it doesn't have to be fluffy and funny, but it is that time for people to get to know the human beyond the job title. Mid-meeting, if you're always working remote, maybe you have a curiosity stop. This one comes from Daniel Coyle. And essentially, what a curiosity stop is a pause in the meeting. Given that the purpose of this meeting was X, what are you thinking? How are you feeling? What are you noticing? One question. Give people time to reflect on that and then a way for everybody to share their answers. And then after the meeting, when we're face to face, we chat in the hallway as we're leaving. We'll build some time in for that remotely and connect with somebody for the next 10 minutes. Make sure that people are leaving time afterwards. And as a leader, you can do it with somebody who is in the meeting, but even people within there. And then that's where that proactive piece might come. We were thinking this or we built this. Normally, we would speak that out loud, speak it out loud remotely, of course. And then on best behavior this week, three questions, only three questions to think about. What are you doing intentionally to drive connection? That's for everybody and anybody. Send a thank you, send a note, send something funny. It doesn't matter, just build the connection. Connection comes from being seen, heard, and valued. And then there's your four P's. Right? What kind of work are you doing? Are you just being productive? Have you been proactive? What's the potential that's going to build from here for you, for your team, for the work you're doing? And then people, 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 always people. And then your toggle equation, asynchronous and synchronous. And so most often we say if you can start collaboration work face to face or synchronously, and then toggle asynchronous and synchronous. Woo,
perfect.
there was a lot. There
There
we are.
was it was three questions and four question marks, but we can do the math.
You always can.
Um, Too funny. We're back April 17th. And again, the next one is a Thursday. And so
Mhm.
appreciate it. May not necessarily work for everybody's schedule with a little change of habit. But if you do register, you will get a copy of the recording. And with that, Jenny, thank you so much. I appreciate you. And have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Take care.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you, Craig.